Zogt the Gemara. The Savar of Akiva. We'll start from the Mishnah. That Mem Dal Ramanal. Machzor Gushasai. If someone is over a lav and he marries a woman who was the garish, and then she married somebody else, and then he took her back, so she's ushered him with a lav. Marrying a woman who made chalitza too, that's also chayv elaven. Marrying the relative of your chalutza, that's only an issa d'rabbanan. Yosy v'avlad mamzer. You have to divorce that wife, and the vlad would be a mamzer. They were Rebbe Kiva. Now, Rebbe Kiva holds that chayv elaven make a mamzer. The question is going to be, why would a issa d'rabbanan make a mamzer? So the Gemara is going to end up changing krivas chalutzasai to krivas grushas. The Chachamim ain't about mamzer, umoidim, but they agree that benoisa krivas grushasai, which is a chiyuv, a raisa of kares, shavlad mamzer. Fact the Gemara, the Savar Rabbi Akiva, and noise krivas chalutzasai avlad mamzer. We are Amarish Lakish said earlier on the memo midbeis kan shana Rebbe. Achos Karushim with different Torah, and Achos Chalutzim with different Seifrim. The Shlokish told us that Achos Chalutza is only Asur Midirabanan. So if it's only Asur Midirabanan, how could the Mishnah say in Rabbi Kiva that would be a Vlad Mamzer? And for the Gemara, you're right, we have to amend the Mishnah. Tani Kraivas Kedushasai. Say that when Rabbi Kiva says Kraivas Chalutzasai, it really should say Kraivas Kedushasai, which is a Chiyuv Kares. Good morning. Hakinami Mistafer. That's also Mistafer that way. Besides our kasha on Rabbi Kiva, it's anyway Mistafer that Pshat in the Mishnah is Korvus Krushasa, that's Korvus Chotas. The Katani Seifa, the Seifa of the Mishnah says, Umoidim, the nights of Korvus Krushasa, Shavlad Bamser. If that's one of the items that they were discussing, Hanyu the Katani Umoidim, it makes sense to say that everybody agrees by Korvus Krushasa. But if they're not even arguing about that, well, then my umoidim. Why in the world would it mention that they're moidim in this case if it has nothing to do with the machlokas discussed? In fact, tomorrow, and now we're up to where we left off yesterday. The Dilma is on Mem Dalet Amar Aleph, about 8 lines from the bottom, the second word from the end of the line, umoidim. So we just changed the wording of the Mishnah, where Rabbi Kiva said, "Hanoisha Korvus Chalutzasai Yosy v'avlad mamzer," even though it's only a derabanan, and we changed it to Korvus Krushasai, which is a chiyuv deraisa of kares. So, frankly, more v'dilma hakamashmalon. Maybe the reason why the Sefer says umoidim v'noisha Korvus Krushasai is not because that's what they were discussing earlier, but rather just to tell you a chiddush, a halacha, the yesh mamzer b'chayv krisus. Maybe all the Mishnah is trying to tell us is that there is a rule that when there's a union of a chayv krisus, that produces a mamzer. Zok Gemara, I don't need this Mishnah to tell that to me, because hakatani la lakaman, the Mishnah very clearly lays out these rules later on, where the Mishnah says is eo mamzer kol she'er basar shu b'lo yavai divrei Rabbi Kiva. According to Rabbi Kiva, it's chayv elaven. And Reb Shimon HaTimani Omer kol shechayav nolav kares b'dei shemayim. And Reb Shimon HaTimani says kares, and the Tana says v'aloch l'kedvarov. So you already know exactly what the Tana believes. So why do I need the Tana over here to conclude the Mishnah saying umaydim b'noisha korvus krushasai shavlad mamzer? Zok Gemara v'dilma kasasim lantana Reb Shimon HaTimani. Maybe our Tana here wants to also show that Allah is like Reb Shimon HaTimani. In Kezak Gemara, it should have said a general rule of all chayve krisos produce a mamzer. Why did it list one specific example that's not even like a flagship example? Korvus Krushasai lamali. The fact that the Tana decided to pick a specific example, elashmamina iriba. It must be that was what the discussion was about. That's what Rabbi Kiva commented on earlier. Correct, Gemara? No. But maybe that's not what the Tana was talking about. Why did the Tana conclude with the case of Noisei Krevis Kushasai? That's because it's the most similar to the earlier cases that Rabbi Kiva listed off. It's most similar. That's why it picked it as an example of a Chayv Krishos, but similar to the different cases that Rabbi Kiva had listed earlier. Zok Gemara. So we couldn't prove that when the Mishnah says Krevis Chalutzasai, that it means Krevis Kushasai. So does that mean you want to argue that El Krevis Chalutzasai the Rabbi Kiva have a mamzer? Or are you going to suggest that Krevis Chalutzasai, which is only an Isser D'Rabbanan, according to Rabbi Kiva, such a marriage would produce a mamzer? Morning, Dovi. The reason why Rabbi Kiva holds that Krevis Chalutzasai, the Vlad is a mamzer, even though normally Chayve D'Rabbanans would not produce a mamzer, is because by Chalutz there's a special pasuk. Domakra Beis Chalutz Anal, Hakas of Kari Beisai. Since the Torah called it Beis Chalutz Anal, the Torah is sort of saying that there's some type of relationship. Beisai Zu Ishtoi. And that's why, although all other Chayve Lavin might not produce a mamzer, although all Chayve Lavin do produce a mamzer, although all Isurim D'Rabbanan might not produce a mamzer, but the households, the relatives of his chalutza would produce a mamzer because it says Beisa. Okay, I'm going to shut up my camera for just a second. This doesn't have to be, nobody needs to see this. I should have shut off the sound too. I thought we're going to think it's the Shayfer Shal Mashiach. And then they'll, okay, it's up to Gemara Vayter.
Yes, I feel horrible for you.
No, it sounds much worse than it feels. So I'll be okay. Everyone's happy around me. I'm much quieter. It's amazing.
Right. I'm the only one here. Then, if you want to rest,
Slavey's here.
Oh, sorry, because I see an empty room. Okay, good morning.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayter. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Barevi. Hakoil Moedim. Everybody agrees. The Machzer Grushasai. If someone takes back his grusha, which is an Isser Lav, Shavlat Pogum. So even though the Vlad is not a mamzer, because Rabbi Shimon Atimani says that the Vlad's only a mamzer if it's a Chayv Krisos, but the Vlad is still Pogum L'Kahuna. So the child, if the daughter was born, the daughter would not be able to marry a Kohen. Man HaKoil Moedim, who are we referring to when we say that everybody would agree? Zok Gemara Shimon Atimani. Yeah, even though Shimon Atimani said that the child will not become a mamzer if the Isser of this union is only a lav and not a chiv kares, nevertheless, Nehida mamzer lahava, it's the child's not a mamzer, but pagami hava. The child was still blemished, and the child would not be able to marry a kohen. And how do we know this? We call the kohen Remi Alman. We must make a kavachomer from the child of an almana who married a kohen gadol illegally. Uma almana a kohen gadol. Madach an almana to a kohen gadol. She'ein isura shava v'koil. Her isur is not universal. Only a kohen gadol is usher to an almana. Everybody else, even kohanim, are allowed to marry an almana. Nevertheless, b'napagim, the child that's produced by a union of a kohen gadol and almana, that child will be pagum, and that child will not be able to marry a kohen if it's a girl. Zu, this child of an Isser Lav, of Machzer Grushasai, which Machzer Grushasai is something that's not only usher to the kohanim, it's usher to every person. Every Yid is usher to be Machzer Grushasai. So Zu, she's Shava B'Koil, Ein Odin, Shebanat Pagam, she's worse than Alman Kohen Gadol, so her child should also be Pagam. For Gemara, that's not a good Kavachim. We have actually three problems with this raya. Problem number one is the Kal V'chomer is not a good Kal V'chomer. Why? Because Mal Almana Shekini Atzma Mischalelas. You're right. The Almana has a kuladik aside that it's a weaker Isser because it only applies to a Kohen Gadol. True, but she has a Chomerdik aside as well, and that is after this union, after she marries this Kohen, even if her Kohen Gadol husband dies and she's an Almana, she will no longer be allowed to marry even a Kohen Hedge. So that union is Mechal her herself. So that would explain why it's also Mechal her children. But Machzer Grushasai, even before he took her back, she was already a Grusha, and she was already Usher to marry a Kohen. So by taking her back, it didn't make her any more Usher. So therefore, who said children born from that union will become Usher to Kohen? So that was question number one. You don't have a good raya that the child of a Machzer Grushasai should be pogrom because your Kal V'chomer is flawed. But I'll bring you another raya that the child shouldn't be pogrom. Because the pasuk says, in reference to someone who's Machzer Grushasai, the pasuk says, he to'eva. Ksiv is what it says. But we're Medayik, only she is a to'eva. Vein badel to'eva. Her children don't become to'eva. They don't become disgusting. They don't become blemished. So that's a support to refute what we're saying, that the child of Machzer Grushasai is possible kuna. But we have a third problem with your argument, because Tanya we learned Hamachzer Grushasai, Va'noisei Chalutzasai, Va'noisei Kroivis Chalutzasai, which is our Mishnah. Rabbi Kiva Iver Ein Loiba Kedushin. So this is not there's no Kedushin. Ve'ena Tzrichai Men Get. And so this is not our Mishnah. This is a Braisha elaborating on our Mishnah. And she doesn't even have to give a get. V'i Psula, she's puzzled. Uvlada puzzle. And the Koifin Oisa Lahaitzi, and you'll force him to divorce his wife. The Chachamim Yesh Kedushin, you could, Kedushin will be typed because these are Chai V'Lavin, Utzrichai Menu Get, and therefore she requires a get because she's considered married. And the Hik Shera, she's kosher to marry a Kohen. Uvlada kosher. Now I too quickly touched the Hik Shera to marry a Kohen. The Gemara is going to be proving that. Uvlada kosher. So Laman, when we're discussing, according to the Chacham, that Yesh Lama Kedushin and she's kosher, Lav L'Kahuna, doesn't it mean that she's kosher L'Kahuna? Zok to Gemara, it does not mean that. She becomes possible. Loy L'Kal, she's only mutter to a Yisrael, but Avada, she cannot marry a Kohen. Let's think about it. What was the case? Machzer Grushasai, Noisei Chalutzasai, and Noisei Kroivis Chalutzasai. So the case of Machzer Grushasai, which is in the list, it's surely not. It can't be the Kahuna. She's a Grusha. So Loy L'Kal, we're saying that she's mutter to a Yisrael, but not to a Kohen. Ihachi. I'm sorry, I didn't read this properly. Laman is asking on the child, so I apologize. I didn't explain it properly. Laman, when we just said a second ago, Vlad kosher, who is the Vlad kosher? Lav L'Kahuna, isn't it kosher L'Kahuna? And that proves that we're wrong. We wanted to say that the child of a Machzer Grushasai is Pasal L'Kahuna, but here it says Vlad kosher. So no, when it says Vlad kosher, it means L'Kahal. It just means that the child's not a mamzer. But of course, the child will not marry a Kohen. If you're going to touch the word Ksheira in the Mishnah, that it's kosher, L'Kahal, but not the Kahuna, well then, a moment earlier, it says Hik Shera. When it says Hik Shera, we'd also have to interpret it the same way. Laman, Ilem L'Kahal, if what it's telling us is that she's Mutter L'Kahal, Pshita, why should she be Asher L'Kahal? We shouldn't Zanya, if so L'Kahal, because she did Nus. She should be Asher L'Kahal. What did she do? Machzer Grushasai. That doesn't make a mamzer. Noisei Chalutzasai. We're talking here now, according to the Chachamim, who hold only Chayvei Krisos, create a mamzer. So Machzer Grushasai, Noisei Chalutzasai, and Noisei Kroivis Chalutzasai, none of these should create a mamzer. So you can't say that when the Chachamim said Hik Shera, that it means lakal. That's posh. Elalav lakahuna. When it says hikshera, it must be that she's even kosher lakahuna. Umidahi lakahuna. Since we're saying she's kosher lakahuna, then when it says vlada kosher, it must also mean the same thing as it meant when it says hikshera. So umidahika lakahuna, vlada nami lakahuna. Then you must say that the word kshera, referring to her child, is also telling us that he's mutter lakayim. Zok to Gemara, and if the Bryce is saying that the child is mutter to lakayim, it proves us wrong when we said that the vlad of such a union of a chayv elaven will be possible. Correct. Zok to Gemara, that's not a kasha. Midi area, you don't have to say that kshera referring to the mother and kshera referring to the child are referring to the same type of kshera. Ha'chid when it says kshera l'gabe the mother, it means l'kahuna. And when it says kshera l'gabe the child, it could mean to the Yisrael, meaning he's not a mamzer. But you don't have a raya that the child is kosher l'kahuna. And ha'chidami mistabra. Anyway, you have to learn in the Sefer of the Mishnah, according to the Chachamim, that when it says hikshera, it's referring to kahuna. When it says vlada kosher, it's referring to Yisrael. You have to split them up. You can't say that the kshera is referring to the same thing. Why? The Ketani Reisha, the Reisha said, when Rabbi Kiva was still talking, he pesula vlada puzzle. When such a chayv elaven union occurs, she will become puzzle and her vlad will be puzzle. So let's think about it. What does Rabbi Kiva mean? He pesula laman. When Rabbi Kiva said that she's puzzle, who was she puzzle to? Ilema the kahal. If you're saying that she's puzzle to the kahal, mishum dezanya, officers like the kahal, you're saying just because she did nus, she's puzzle the kahal. She doesn't become mamzer. She might have done a big affair, but she didn't become mamzer. So Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold that she's no longer allowed to marry a kohen, but she's surely allowed to remarry. It must mean when Rabbi Kiva said that she's puzzle, Rabbi Kiva must have meant that she may no longer marry a kohen. Well, then vlada puzzle, what does that mean? If it means the same thing, puzzle to kahuna, laman, ilim kahuna, halakal kosher. Are you going to suggest that according to Rabbi Kiva, the child of a union that was a chayv elaven would not be a mamzer? Ha'amar Rabbi Kiva, Avlad mamzer. We know Rabbi Kiva says that the Avlad is a mamzer. Elapshita lekahal. Which means, according to Rabbi Kiva, when it says he psula, it's referring to puzzle to a kohen, and when it says that the child is puzzle, it means puzzle lekahal. So the same way we can separate the puzzle to her and the puzzle to the child, referring to do different things. In the Reisha, when we're talking about Rabbi Kiva, Sefer Nami, in the Sefer, when we're talking about the Chachamim, you can say Hachadisa, Vachadisa. Okay, so
Rabbi Kiva holds those people known that this union produces a mamzer. Why can't we say that when he says he psula, he's talking about psula power?
Because no one holds that if a woman does nus, she may no longer marry a Yisrael. Correct. The mamzer is a mamzer, but she's not a mamzer. So we've had three challenges to this halacha that the vlad is pog. The first challenge we were able to deal with, right? We found for the brisa, but we still have two more challenges, right? So the hita eva nami. What about the pasuk that we quoted that says hita eva? Only a machzor b'shasui, only the woman is pogum, but bana, her children are not taiva. So that also proves that the child of Chavi Lavin are not pogum. So tomorrow we'll darshan it differently, like we had it earlier in the Masechta. Hitayeva, then Rasa Tayeva. If someone was machzor b'shasui, but he also had another wife, and then he dies without children, although you won't do yibam on the woman who he took back, but on the other woman who's a perfectly kosher wife, you would do yibam on her. So that's what you learn from there. You don't learn anything from there about the status of her children. But her children might be pogum. So that took care of the second kasha. So now all we have to deal with is the kal v'chomer that we shlugged up. El almana kasha. So what was the problem with almana? The Gemara made a kal v'chomer. Madach almana l'kain gadol, which is a weak lav because it only applies to a specific person. Nevertheless, the child of such a union is possible. If someone's over the issue of machzor b'shasui, which is a universal law that applies to everyone in Klal Yisrael, surely the child should be a pugum. That was the Gemara's kasha. The Gemara slug up the Kal V'chomer by saying, El Almana kasha, Mal Almana, Shekin Hiatzal Mischalelas. You know why the child of an Almana is Pasal Kuna? Because through this union, she also became Pasal Kuna. But a Machzer Rishasai, she doesn't become any more apostle to a Kayin than she was before she took her back, because she was already a Grusha. So that's upshot to the covenant. Ali Idmar Hachi Idmar. So we'll have to have another raya. We'll have to bring another raya that the Machzer Rishasai, the Vladas Pogum. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi, Hakoel Moedim, Beba Al Chayve Krisos. Everybody agrees that Beba Al Chayve Krisos Shavlat Pogum. So we have to abort. We have to abort the original statement that says that a Chayve Lavin makes the Vlat Pogum. So this entire daf, this entire Omer that we learned is no longer relevant because the Vlat is talking not Pogum, but it's referring to Chayve Krisos, which on its face is very schwer, because it's not just Pogum, it's a mamzer. So we have to see according to who would this statement be a chiddush. So maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua. Who is Rabbi Yeshua? The Avlagav Rabbi Yeshua ein mamzer mechayve krisos. Even though Rabbi Yeshua said that to mechayve krisos there's no mamzer. We learned this earlier. Rather, the only thing that produces a mamzer is a chayve misas bezdin. So if someone is Baal Ashes Ish, the Misa would be Chenek, there the child will be a mamzer. But all of the women who are only a Chayve Krisos, they don't produce a mamzer. So on that, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi said that Nehida Mamzer Lehava, even though the child's not a mamzer from a Chayve Krisos, Pogum Miyohava, it would be Pogum Mikavochemer Me'almona. Uma Almona L'Chayin God, Sheini Surah Shabbat B'Koil. The same Kal V'chomer as before. B'na Pogum Zu Sheisur Shabbat B'Koil Einay Din Sheb'na Pogum. You might want to ask the same question that we asked earlier. V'chitema mal almano shekin hi atzma mischalalas. That's not a kasha, because Hakanami here, once you were boil a woman who your chayiv cars for, kibin shabala asazoyna. This woman, up until now, would have been mutter to marry a kohen. Now that you had relations with her, she becomes a zoyna and she becomes pasal kohuna. So now it's perfectly parallel. Just like the almana, he atzma mischalelas with the bia to the kohen gadol. So too, a chayve krisos, the woman herself becomes pasal to a kohen with the bia because it makes her into a zoyna, and therefore it's logical to say that her children are also pogum. Everybody agrees. The Eved, the Ovid Kechavim, Habal Bas Yisrael. If an Eved or a Goy has relations with a Bas Yisrael, that child, if it's born, is Shavlad Mamzer. That child will be a Mamzer. Man HaKoel Moedim. When we say HaKoel Moedim, who are we referring to? Zok the Gemara, Shimon HaTeimani. Maybe we're going according to Shimon HaTeimani. Even though Shimon HaTeimani said that a union of Chavi Lavin does not produce, it's allowed to marry a guy. Even though Shimon HaTeimani says there's no mamzer of Chavi Lavin for marrying an Eved or an Ovid Kechavim, no. So if someone sleeps with a shiksa, that doesn't make him Chavi Misa. It's allowed. He probably won't be able to deny Pogum because he won't be able to shidduch with his kids. I think it works both ways. So the Avagav Dom Shum Natimani in Mamshem Chayv Lavin, nevertheless, Hanamili Michayv Lavin, the tops of the Kedusha. Chayv Lavin, such as Machshir Grushasai, where if someone marries such a woman, if someone gives Kedusha to such a woman, the Kedusha is Teufels. Sure, he's over allowed if he has relations with her, but the Kedushin is Chal. So since the Kedushin is Chal, that's why the union does not produce a Mamzer. Aval Hacha. But when a guy marries a Jewish girl, or an Eved marries a Jewish girl, Aval Hacha Eved Kechavim, the Eved, keeping the Loy Tapsa Kedushin, since if they tried making Kedushin, that wouldn't work, Kechayve krisus dami. Therefore, it's similar to chayve krisus, who, if you try to make kedushin on a woman, who you're chayiv chorus, if you marry her, that kedushin wouldn't work either. So we have a new rule, so to speak, that anytime someone has relations with a woman, that if he tried to give her kedushin, the kedushin would not work. The child born from such a union would be a mamzer. Frag Gemara Meisvei. Ovid Gachavim, the Eved, Habal Bas Yisrael, a guy or an Eved who had relations with a Jewish girl. Havlad Mamzer, the Vlad is a Mamzer. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda Aimer, Rab Shimon ben Yehuda says, Ein Mamzer, Ella Mimisha, Isura, Isra Erva, Lanishkaris. I'm not focusing, Dr. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, on whether or not Kedushin is typhus. The only type of union that produces a mamzer is if there's a chi of karis for this union. And the fact is, for an eved and the eved gachavim, there is no chi of karis. So therefore, we cannot say that it's Rab Shimon who we're saying this halacha according to. Amar Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef is explaining what did the Gemara mean when the Gemara says, what did Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan mean when he said that everybody agrees that an Eved, Vayvet Yechavim, Habal Bas Yisrael Avad Mamzer? Who would that be? Rebbe. It's Rebbe. Who is Rebbe? Af Agav the Rebbe Omer. Even though Rebbe said it elsewhere that Ein Devarim Halalu Amurim Elal Divrei Rebbe Kiva. Even though Rebbe said Ein Devarim Halalu Amurim Elal Divrei Akiva, Elal Divrei Rabbi Akiva. And I don't hold to this. So let's see Rashi for some context. Let's see Rashi for some context of where Rebbe said what. So if we look at Rashi just off to the side, about an inch down, Avagav the Kama Rebbe, the Perak Rebbe Gamliel, later on in the Masechta, Ein Bia Acher Chalitza. Rabbi quoted that there's no bia after chalitza, meaning if there are two women who fell to Yibam, there were two co-wives, they fell to Yibam. If someone did chalitza on wife A, and afterwards he wrongly did bia on wife B, ubalasu, the bia that he made on wife B has zero impact. It doesn't act like a Yibam that we now require a get for them to separate, because the bia was just a regular bia snus, because chalitza was already made on wife A. The Ka'amar, and Rebbe said, Ein hadvarim halalu amurim, the bia after chalitza tafsa. Who says that bia after chalitza will not be typhus kedushin? Only Rebbe Kiva would say that, because Rebbe Kiva holds that what is the isser for him to make bia on wife B after he already made chalitza on wife A? The Isser is an Isser Lav. It's only Rabbi Kiva who holds that Kedushin is not Toifus on the Chayv Lav. Avalidei, but me, myself, I hold that Kedushin is Toifus b'Chayv Lav. Lois Firle. Nevertheless, even though such a child wouldn't be a mamzer, the child of a union of someone who did Yibam after he already did Chalitza, Afilahachi, be'ovid kachavim ve'evid moedim, Rebbe would still agree by an Eved and the Eved Kachavim that the Vlad will be a mamzer. So let's see this again. Mama Kalmoidim Rebbe Avagav Rebbe Omer in Advar Malalu Amurim El Div Rebbe Kiva Shahaya Oisa Chalutza Ke'erva. But the Leila Shvirlei, but Rebbe holds that a Chalutza is not an erva because it's only a lav and Kedushin is typhus b'chayv lavin. But the Eved Kachavim the Eved Moida will be Moida. Why is he Moida? The Chi also Rabdimi. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avodimi, Mishum Rabbeinu. When Rabdimi came, he said over in the name of Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu is Rebbe, and he said as follows: So we have Rabdimi quoting from Rebbe this halacha that an Eved and an Oived Kachavim, which are only Chayve Lavin at best, if a child is born from such a union, the child would be a mamzer. Rab Acha Sar Habira, Rab Acha, the king of the castle, right? Sarah Beer literally was the king of the castle. Rab Tamchum, Pared Rab Chia, Ish Kfar Aku, and Rab Tamchum, the son of Rab Chia from Kfar Aku, Porek Hanu Shvuasa, The Asuma Armin Litzvaya. Rahman Litzlan, there were some girls that were captured by the Goyim, and they were probably violated. And these two people bailed them out. That's what they used to do. They used to come sell them as slaves. So these two people bailed them out. Havachada, Rahman Litzlan, one of these girls, the Abram of the she became pregnant from a rape that she suffered at the hands of these horrible captors. But also look at their mommy. And they asked her mommy, what is the status of this child? This is precisely all of these three Gedoyle Olam say the Amri Ovid Chavim Eved Habal Basishol Havlad Mamzer. And that's what we quoted earlier from Rav Dimi as well, from Rabbeinu, which is tragic. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Usa Lamechshav Gavri, you think I'm impressed by your name dropping because you're listing all these people? I'm not impressed with all of this long list of people that you're listing off. Agree that the Vlad is a mamzer. I'm going to stick to the basics. Rav Shmuel beBavel, Rav and Shmuel in Bavel, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who Bar Kapar Beretz Yisrael, and Rabbi Shua ben Levi Bar Kapar Beretz Yisrael, but Amrillah Chaluve Bar Kapara the Aili Zikne Dorim, or maybe it's not Bar Kapara in Eretz Yisrael, maybe it's a Zikne Dorim in Eretz Yisrael, but they all unanimously agree the Amri Ovid V'Chav Me'evid Haba Bas Yisrael Havlat Kosher. So don't just write off this child. This girl became pregnant. Now her child's a mamzer. No, there's many people who disagree and hold that the Vlad will be kosher. So don't write them off so quickly. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi. So Rabbi Yosef, it's Rabbi. Also, Rabbi Dimi, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Dimi, Yeshua Rabbeinu. Amru, they said in the name of Rabbi, Ovid V'Chav Me'evid Habal Basol Havlad Mamzer. So they said, forget the long list of Rabbanim that we quoted, who say the Vlad is mamzer, which you're not impressed by, but Rebbe himself, forget the long list. Rebbe himself, that's very powerful. And Rebbe says the Vlad is a mamzer. So how could you say, like the other Shitas, that a Vlad is kosher? Havlad Makulkal. He says the Vlad is Makulkal. So the Rebbe said the Vlad is a mamzer. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said the Vlad is Makulkal. What does Makulkal mean? Laman. Ilem Lakal. If you're going to say it's Makulkal, meaning it's a mamzer, Ham Rabbi Shua Havlad kosher. You just quoted a minute ago that Rabbi Shua said the Vlad is kosher. Ela Lakahuda. Rabbi Shua agrees at least that this child is possible to Kahuna. Zok Gemara, the Kulu Amorai, the Mashri, because even those Amorai who hold that this child is not a mamzer, they do agree, Shavlad Pagam Lakahuna. So if this girl, Rahman gives birth to a girl, that girl would not ever be able to marry a Kain. Why? We would make a Kavachaimer from an Almana. Ma Almana Lakain Gadol. Shein Yisura Shava Bakail. It's not a universal Isser. It's only for a Kain Gadol. Pagam, the child may not marry a Kain anymore. Zu Sheishura Shava Bakail. Heved Va'akum. Every Jewish girl is not allowed to marry such a woman. Not pagam, surely the child should be pagam. Are you going to say, Ma'al Alman L'Kohen Gadol, he asks for Mischalelas. The Alman L'Kohen Gadol becomes Mischalelas when she does the biyah to the Kohen Gadol. Hachanami, Kivish Nevela Pasna. So too, once an Eved or a Goy is ba on the Jewish girl, she becomes Pasna L'Kohuna. Am Rabbi Yochanan, Yishum Rabbi, which is the Bach, Yishum Rabbi, Mishum Rab Shimon, Minayin Loy V'Kachavim, the Eved, Haba, Ala Kahenis, Val Halavia, Ala Yisraelish, Shepaslua. How do you know that they pass her to Kahuna? Shenemar Ubas Koyen, Kisia Almana Ugrusha. And we learn, Mi Sheyeshla Almanas, the Gerishin Ba, who could marry a Kohen, somebody who has the status of an Almana or Gerishin, meaning if you do Kedushin on her, and then you die, she becomes an almana. If you do kedushin on her, in order for her to go free, you have to divorce her. Yatsu, since they would not create an almana status if they died, and they would not create a grusha status if they separated, therefore, she's puzzled because she's not allowed to marry such a man.
You know, are we done with that statement? Can we figure out? Okay, we started on the bottom of $1 an hour. A comoid. We changed the lotion, and now we know it's very at the end of that.
The kol moedim that you're talking about is the evet vayvet kacham.
The rewrite was a comoid.
Because there was a kol moedim about the
Private creeps of blood problem, right?
that was according to Rabbi Shua. We're finished with that, and now we started a new thing about an evet va'akam abov b'Yisrael to the blazim mamzer.
That was Rebbe.
And that was Rebbe talking. And now we have a question if we adhere to that, because it was a story. We brought a story down where that happened, and many people wanted to say that it was mutter, and the Gemara now is bringing down Rebbe who says it's usher. So we still have a controversy. Who do we pass like? Is it mutter or is it usher? Yeah, we're still in that. So Zok the Gemara. So we have two people who quoted Rebbe. We have one person who quoted Rebbe that the blood is a mamzer, and then we have this latest version of Dam Rabbi Yochanan Shimon. So we had another version. We had another version who quoted Rebbe. We had another version who quoted Rebbe. Where do we have it? No, I'm sorry. So far we only had one version of Rebbe who says that the vlad is a mamzer, right? And we had Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Chanina, we had all these other Amoraim who held the vlad was kosher. So now Abaye comes in and he says, "Ma chozes the samzach of the Ravdim." You're using the power and the weight of Rebbe, who said that the vlad is a mamzer, to overrule everybody and treat this child that was conceived by her captor, who was a goy. You want to make this child into a mamzer. Well, who said you should trust Rav Dimi's version of what Rebbe said, that the vlad is a mamzer? Maybe Samoich ad Ravin. Maybe look at Ravin's version of what Rebbe said. Right. The Chiyasa Ravin, Omar Rebbe Nosson, the Rabbi Omar, he said, Rabbi Nosson of Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, who is Rebbe, Moedim ba l'teva. They agree that the child was not a mamzer. Uman Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, Rebbe. So you see clearly that there's another opinion about what Rebbe said. So who said you should rely on Rabbi Dimi, who makes this child into a mamzer? Maybe you should rely on Ravin, who quoted Rebbe that says this vlad is kosher. The Rav Rav also agreed that this child is not a mamzer. Dahuda also lakameda Rav. Someone once came to Rav to ask him a shaila. Omer lay, and this is the question that he asked Rav. What is the status of such a child? Omer lay, Rav Paskin Avlat kosher. So this is such a beautiful story. This guy had an issue. This guy himself was the child of a woman who conceived him from a goy. So he asked Rav, "Am I mutter? Am I a mamzer? Am I to marry a Jew?" So Rav said, "Sure, you're allowed to." So he says, "Really? Put your money where your mouth is." Amrulay havli bartach. So then let me marry your daughter. It's good. I want to see you do the shidduch. So that sometimes you ask the shadchan, "You're pushing me to take this boy. You're pushing me to take this girl. Would you be mishadach with them?" So I love reading shidduchim that are my Chatanim's children, because I answered, not only would I did. Right? So Zok to Gemara, Omer Lei, Havli Bartach. So you're saying that I'm kosher, so let me marry your daughter. So he said, no, that not. Omer Sini Bar Chiyah Rav, Amri Inchi, people are going to say, Gamla B'madai, Akavarakto. There's a saying that a camel in Madai could walk in its own footsteps. You, Rav, aren't even walking in your own footsteps. You have everything lined up. You have someone who you paskin that the child is mutter and not a mamzer, and you have a daughter who needs a shidduch and there's a shidduch crisis, and you're not taking it, and you're not dancing. So he said, Amrlay, you want to know why I'm not taking him? It has nothing to do with the yichus. It's because Yehava ki Yeshua benun lo yavninu levarti. If he would be a Talmud Chacham and a masmid like Yeshua benun, you think I wouldn't give him my daughter? Of course I would give him my daughter. So the reason why I'm not taking him is not because I don't like his yichus. I'm not taking him because I'm looking for a much more serious bacher. Amalei, Ihava, Yeshua Benun. So he told Rav back, if I was like Yeshua Benun, I don't need you. If I was like Yeshua Benun, I don't need your daughter. I can marry anybody else. But you're messing me up because me, since I'm not like Yeshua Benun, if you don't want to allow me to marry your daughter, if you don't give me your daughter, people aren't going to say it's because I'm not such a big Talmid Chacham like Yeshua Benun. People are going to say because my yichus is possible, and then achrini lo yavale, and then nobody will marry. So that's why I want you, but after be mishadach me. Don't say I'm not good enough for you, because if I was good enough for you, everybody would grab me. I need you to prove that I'm kosher b'yichus. Unless you take me, you won't be able to prove. So tomorrow, this guy was a nudnik, and he wouldn't stop bothering Rav. Rav gave him a dirty look, and the guy dropped it. No need for a shidduch anymore. Rav Masna also said that the child of a goy with a Bas Yisrael is not a mamzer. And Rabbi Yehuda held it was mutter. Zil Itmar, either go, what did you advise this person? Either go to a place where they don't know who you are and just mix in, and no one will ever dream that you're the child of an Eved or an Eved Kacham. They'll just think you're a regular Shiva Bacher, and hopefully they won't check too much, and then you'll be able to get married. Or find a girl who also is a product of an Eved Kacham Habal Bas Yisrael, and she will be happy to be Mishadach with you. And when he came to Rava gave him the same advice. Either go to goats, meaning go where they don't know you, and you could start off with a clean slate, or marry someone just like you. The people of the city of Michsi sent a message to Rabba, and they asked him the following shayla. So until now, we were talking about a full Eved or a full guy. Habal Bas Yisrael is the child kosher, or is the child of mamzer. And from our Gemara, it seems like the resolution was that the child was kosher. But what if it was a half Eved, or a half of it, or it was half Eved, half Enchard? You can't have a half a guy, but you could have half Eved, half Enchard, meaning there was an Eved that was owned by two partners, and one of the partners freed his portion of the Eved. So now he's half Jew, half Goy. Ma, what would Allah be? Omer lei. And so Rabbi answered back, I don't understand. How's the Eved Kulai? Amrinat kosher. If he was completely an Eved, we say the child is kosher. So only half of this Eved, certainly the blood shouldn't be a mamzer. Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said, Mora the Shmai Tzamani. Who is the one that said Eved Mabal Bas Yisrael blood kosher? It was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda said, someone who's half Eved, half Echad, now produces tremendous complications. Habal Bas Yisrael, and he lives with a girl. This child, there's no hope for it. This child cannot marry anybody. Rashi, Klaimer Mamzer, the child is a mamzer. So why you're telling me, Rabba, that it shouldn't be any worse than an Eved and Eved Kachavim? Well, guess what? Rabbi Yehuda said it is worse. Rabbi Yehuda says it's a mamzer, and we're going to soon see why. Ki itmar Rabbi Yehuda. So Zok Gemara, where did Rabbi Yehuda say this halacha? Because Rabbi is trying to say, I don't understand. If a full Eved wouldn't make the child into a mamzer, why would only a half Eved make the child into a mamzer? Zok Gemara, if he was just ba'aleh, if he just had relations with her, Eina Chanami, everybody agrees the child wouldn't be a mamzer. Where Rabbi Yehuda said the child's a mamzer is going to Kaddish Bas Yisrael. Before he was boil her, he made kedushin on her. Now she's a half eishesish. The nimtza tzad abdu shaboy mishtamish beishesish. Now when he has relations with her, it's his whole body that's having relations with her. His evet side and his ben chayrin side. His Ben Chayrin side is married to her, made kedushin on her, but his Eved side is not married to her. So his Eved side is just like a strange person having a relation with a married woman. That's why the child's a mamzer. So if he's a full guy, it's a lot simpler. Or if he didn't do kedushin, they just had relations, it's a lot simpler. But if you make kedushin first and you made this woman into a nation shish, now it's much more complicated. Because the nimta said Abishaboy, Mishtamis Basis. Frank the Gemara, well, Armi Nardoi, the people of Nardah said, Mishmeid Reb Yaakov, in the name of Reb Yaakov. The Dibber Apostle, Apostle Afilu B'Tnuya, the Mandomer who holds that the Vlad is possible when it's the product of an Eved or a guy, it's possible even if the woman is not married. And according to the Mandomer who holds the Vlad is not a mamzer, Makshir Afilu Basis is. So your whole theory of speaking with Kedushin is blown out of the water, because that's simply not factual. They both learned it out of Eshesav, which is an Isser, Dairaisa. And why is Eshesav unique to all the other Arayas? Because the Torah, when it tells us that the product of an illicit marriage is a mamzer, the Torah actually says it when the Torah is talking about Eshesav. That makes Eshesav very unique. So if I look at Rashi on Eshesav, the mamzeris like Aboksev. We learn to all Arayas, but the source of mamzeris is when the Torah is discussing Eshesav. The Chsiva Yikach Ish as Eshes of it, the Samach Lei, and right nearby, the pasuk says Layave Mamzer. So they're learning out of Eshesav. Is this similar to Eshesav, and that's why the child should be a mamzer, or is this not similar to Eshesav, and therefore the child was a mamzer? Therefore the child was not a mamzer. Man the apostle, the man who holds that the child is a mamzer. Savar ma Eshesav, just like Eshesav. If you try making kedushin on the wife of your father, the kedushin is not toifus, and a vlad mamzer. Afkol, so every union, a kedushin wouldn't be chal. Have vlad mamzer, the vlad will be a mamzer. Uman the maksher, the man who holds that the vlad would not be a mamzer by an eved shabal b'Yisrael. Savar ma Eshesav, the day lo tafseba kedushin, but lachri tafseba kedushin. And the Eshesav, if you go be mekadosh, sure, your kedushin won't work. But if you're mekadosh any other woman, or if any other man is mekadosh Eshesav, it would be types. So you're kedushin material, and she's kedushin material. Therefore, the vlad is a mamzer. They're not even in the parsha of kedushin, and therefore their relation does not produce a mamzer. Ella, so our problem is we quoted the at the top. Why not? We have not yet found the reason. Why should Oisel not have a takana? Because he holds that if it's a full Ovid Mechavim, the blood will be mutter. So what's the problem if it's half and half? Okay, Itmar Rabbi Yehuda is Kagoin Shabbat al Esesh Ish. The woman, the Chetzei Eved, the Chetzei Ben Chayrin, Habal Bas Yisrael, she wasn't a Penuya, she wasn't single, she was married. So therefore, the Nimtasat Cherish Shaboy, Nishtamis Beishish. His goy side, consistent with what we've said until now, will not have any impact to make a mamzer. But his Jew side is being boiled neshishish, and that makes a woman, that makes a child into a mamzer. Omer Ravina, Omer Rav Gaza, Ikla Rabbi Yosy bar Avin la'asr. Rabbi Yosy bar Avin showed up to our city. There was a scenario where Pnuya was violated by an Ovid Kachavim or an Eved, the Achsher, and they let the child was not a mamzer. But the Eshesh, there was a scenario where it was a married woman who was violated by the guy. Who possible? They said it's possible. But this might have been, this wasn't the guy, this was half and half. And we're reinforcing what we said here, and that is the Tzad Yisrael Shaboy creates a mamzeres. Amar B'Sheishes, L'didi Amar Li Rav Gaza. Rav Gaza told me, Lo Rabbi Yosy bar Avin Hava. It wasn't Rabbi Yosy bar Avin who came to our city, as we quoted the story earlier. Rabbi Yosy bar Zvida Hava. It was Rabbi Yosy bar Zvida who came to our city and Paskin. The Achsher and the Psak was different too. The Achsher bein b'pnuya bein b'eshesh. He held regardless it would not be a mamzer. Omer lei Rav Acha b'rei de Rabba Ravina. Ikla Meimer la'asri. A Meimer showed up at our city one day. the Aksher, and he was Master Bein, the Pnuya Bein Beis Ish, the Hilchazar, what is the halacha? Ovid Kachavim Bevid, Haba Abbas Yisrael, Havlat is kosher, Bein the Pnuya, Bein Beis Ish. We do have a couple more lines to get to the bottom of the sugya, but it's 6:43 already. So we'll stop here. We're almost a full blood ahead, which I'm very happy about. And we will be mamshech tomorrow.
Yosy.
Yes.
So in the case of half